My name's Eliot Terborgh. I'm the new co-president of the Peninsula chapter, along with my colleague Jim Lang, and we're pleased to welcome everybody here today. What we're going to have is just an informal panel discussion, pretty open-ended, to try to address questions from people who are considering cochlear implants. And so that will be the main focus today. We're going to have, first of all, an opening remarks by Ken Peter. Ken is a retired physician in Los Altos who has been very active the past year, giving presentations to various groups around the Bay Area about hearing loss in general. And today he's going to share some slides about cochlear implants in particular. After, we'll open it up then for a panel discussion with myself, Larry Sweeney, Jim Lang, and Sally. And I think once the timing is kind of open-ended in the discussion, but we are going to allow some time at the end of our session, 2:45 at the latest, for just some business announcements, and particularly announcements of future events. If you would like to if you'd like to ask questions at any time during the presentation, please use the raised hand feature at the bottom of your screen. That's probably the easiest way to handle it. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Ken. Ken, please take it away.
Thank you, Eliot. It's a real pleasure to be here with you all. Can you see my slide where it says when hearing aids are not enough?
Yes.
What we're going to be talking about today are cochlear implants. And think of cochlear implant as I'll use the word neuroprosthesis because it's a tool that helps people that have severe to profound hearing loss. And is when you would consider a cochlear implant is when hearing aids no longer work. I think that's coming from Mary. Yeah, thank you, Mary. It was initially developed in actually 1957, and there was early research done by Stanford that really perfected a cochlear implant. So we're really right next door where a lot of the initial research took place. I'm going to just now describe a little bit about what the procedure is. It is a surgery, and there is general anesthesia. The surgical procedure is usually done by an ENT and a neurosurgeon that work together to put in the cochlear implant. And it is considered minimal in terms of potential side effects. Rarely, in 1% of the time, you can get a palsy or weakness from the facial nerve that is most likely temporary. Infections are very rare. It is the kind of procedure, although it's surgical, basically it's an outpatient procedure. In other words, you go home usually later the day after the surgery. So the way it is set up is that there is a microphone and speech processor, which basically usually attaches to your ear, and that is connected by an electrode to a transmitter. Now, what the ENT does, let me just hold on back here. What happened here? Let's see. Okay, give me a second. And slideshow. Okay. The surgeon then makes a little basic incision in the mastoid bone and puts this right underneath the skin in the mastoid bone. So it doesn't really enter the brain area itself initially, but what the surgeon then does is it basically feeds an electrical wire through the cochlea, which is located here, or you can see more closely here. And what this electrical wire does, it directly stimulates the cochlear nerve without having to use any of the damaged hair cells that are not functional when we get to a situation where we have a profound hearing loss. That sets off the cochlear nerve, then sends off by having the electrical impulse, sends off impulses to the brain where there are the audio centers within the temporal lobe. So basically the cochlear implant bypasses all the damaged areas that we have. And it is extremely effective. And you'll be hearing about in a few minutes people's personal stories on getting back hearing in a way that can be highly functional. It usually takes about a month after the surgical procedure, and then there is a turning on of the whole unit. And I think what some of the people will be talking about in a few minutes is that the hearing you're going to get from this may not be exact, will not be exact right when you turn on the neuroprosthesis, the CI unit. It is something that will take some rehabilitation time, but over weeks to months, the hearing can be very high quality. So I do think that another big advantage of it is that it's completely covered by Medicare, whereas you know that hearing aids are usually not covered by Medicare unless you have a Medicare Advantage. So this procedure is the type of procedure that you're really never too old to get. Anyone can benefit from a cochlear implant who has severe to profound hearing loss, as long as their cochlear nerve is intact and there are no other severe contraindications to surgery. But it is not a situation where age would prevent you from getting a cochlear implant. In terms of the different companies, there are 3 companies: Advanced Bionics, Cochlear, and Medell. This is a very good picture that shows what it looks like. And at night, most people take this off, the outside part, or if they go swimming, and then just put it back on when they're after their swim. So it can be very highly functional as well. So with that, I think I'll turn it back to Eliot, and you can continue the discussions. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you, Ken. That was an excellent overview. And every time I hear your presentation, I learn something new, which is good. So what we're going to do now is we're going to have actually 3 panelists, and I'm going to ask each of them to give a brief introduction. And Bob Hall will be our moderator to handle the questions and whatnot. So I'll begin just very briefly. I'm bilateral. I mean, I have cochlear implants on both sides. I got one about 12 years ago, the other one about 11 years ago. And basically, I lost my hearing gradually since I was about the age of 40 with Meniere's disease. And I know a number of us in this group have suffered from Meniere's at one time or another, and that's a whole separate discussion. But anyway, that's how I learned it. I started wearing a hearing aid in my left ear until that ear was no longer effective. Then I started hearing in my right ear, and eventually, about 20 years ago, my ear ENT guy said, sooner or later, you're going to have a cochlear implant. And he was right. So anyway, with that, why don't I shift over? I think we have Larry Sweeney and my co-president, Jim Lang. Maybe give a brief introduction. And then, Bob, maybe you can kind of kick off the Q&A session.
Okay. Do you want Jim and Larry to
Yeah,
talk?
Jim, can you give just a quick intro and overview?
Okay, I started losing my hearing gradually at about the age 65. And it just every year it got worse. I wore 2 hearing aids, would change brands every couple of years to try to take advantage of new developments. and finally reached a point where when I joined Rotary Club, I met a lot of people who had cochlear implants. And they introduced me to HLAA, where I met even more people with cochlear implants. So I started asking my audiologist about that. My audiologist was a little timid about cochlear implants because he said, now, when you get a cochlear implant, you're likely to lose a lot of your natural hearing in that ear, or maybe all of it. And so make sure you know what you want when you start. Well, a year and a half ago, I had made up my mind. I really needed to do something about my hearing and had a cochlear implant implanted by Palo Alto Medical Foundation. I had no problem with the surgery. It was a couple hours in the hospital and then go home. I had no dizziness initially, although about a week later I put night guard in and zoom. I became dizzy right away. It took me a little while to get over that. But, excuse me, then the most interesting thing to me was having the cochlear implant turned on by my new audiologist. I was anticipating a sound like Donald Duck or machine talk or something like that. And I was shocked that when I heard her over the cochlear implant, she sounded just like she had on hearing aids. I had no problem understanding her. She covered her mouth and went through a few exercises, talking and speaking different words and so on. I understood everything perfectly. So I'm a very happy cochlear implant recipient.
Yeah, Larry, can you give us a brief overview?
Can you hear me?
Yeah, sure can.
Okay. Well, I got my story somewhat similar to Jim's. So I started wearing hearing aids probably 25 years ago or something. And I didn't think I needed hearing aids, but my elder son and my wife convinced me that I did. So I got them. And then I was like, Jim, I'm an electrical engineer, and I'm sort of want to be on the leading edge of technology. So I was getting my hearing aids from Costco, and I would update every 3 years or something to get the latest technology. And after my third upgrade, 6 months after I got it, I went back to the technician there and I said, there's something wrong. These hearing aids aren't working right for me. And he tested me and he said, you have what we call profound hearing loss. And this had happened in 6 months from a time when he tested me and gave me hearing aids that worked. And 6 months later, he said, you need to see your audiologist. So I went to see the audiologist, and I was tested by, this was at Palo Alto Medical Foundation, I was tested by their audiologist, who terminated the test partway through and said, you need to talk to the ENT. He was afraid that if he really kept turning up the volume, it was going to damage my hearing even more. The audiologist took one look at the audiogram and said, I'm referring you for a cochlear implant. There was no discussion. It was just a done deal. And the amazing thing was that within, I think, like 6 months, I had a cochlear implant. I had the work done at Stanford with the Stanford Ear Institute there. It was similar to Jim. My wife took me in. You had to get there early in the morning to register and get prepped. 90 minutes in surgery. And then my wife took me home, I think at about 1 o'clock in the afternoon. I had no pain. I took Tylenol once. It's quite an easy recovery. The general anesthetic I didn't get any brain fog or anything like that from it. And they let it heal for a couple of weeks before they give you the outside appliance. And I went into the audiologist. My wife went with me, and she gave me this thing to put over my ear and the magnet on, and said, "Can you hear me?" And I could. And there were three women. Usually if you get the high frequency hearing loss, it's harder to understand women than it is men because their voices are higher in pitch. And so there were three women in the room. I could understand all of them perfectly, immediately. And that was without a hearing aid in the other ear. And unlike Jim, they didn't sound natural. They sounded, I described it as a combination of Donald Duck and the Chipmunks. So it was amusing, but the important thing was I could really understand it. She tested me, the audiologist tested me, and I passed all the tests with flying colors. I went from a word recognition in my left ear of like 15% to 95%, just over that, just with the cochlear implant. So in terms of training my new way of hearing, Eliot suggested that one way he found was to get the audio version of a book and the hard copy of the book and listen to the narrator while you're reading the book. And I did that. I read a variety of books. And after a while, everything started sounding natural. The voices sounded natural. So for me, this was a total miracle. It just changed my life. I mean, it's easy to become, if you're hard of hearing, to become sort of a hermit, to avoid social situations, to avoid talking on the phone and so forth. And it's very important if you're having hearing loss to get help as soon as you can. It's hard to admit you're growing older and maybe you're losing your hearing, but it's worth doing something about it. So, end of speech.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Larry. Let's see, Bob is going to be our moderator today, and Bob is also bilateral. You want to give a little overview of how you got there?
Yes, my situation was rather different. In 1948, when I was 4 years old, I started to have earaches every winter. And
Hey,
I
Bob,
had several in a row.
Bob,
Yeah,
can you turn and face the camera on your computer? Because your voice is also coming in muted. There we go.
there we go. Okay. All right. So I was having this trouble, and my parents talked to the local doctor who sent us up to an ENT. And he said, well, I can't treat him now because he's too young, but I can do it when he's 6 years old. So the treatment was putting radium rods down my nose. And you heard me right, it was radioactive material. This is 1950. And I think I had maybe 10 sessions of that, like weekly. And then after that, I was sent, but we didn't go anymore. By the time I was 12, my brother and I got watches, wrist watches, and I couldn't hear mine tick, but he could hear his tick. And then in high school, I started to have very loud tinnitus, just overwhelmingly. So even in class, it was hard to hear what was being said. And that was the first symptoms I had of Meniere's, by the way. And then the Meniere's came. I had my first Meniere's attack was when I was 21. And I had a period there where I was free of it for 9 years, but then it came back really bad. And that's when my hearing started to go. That was 1980. And during the decade of the 80s, I really couldn't hear anything anymore. Now, I was trained as a cellist, and I had to stop playing because I couldn't hear well enough. Music was just noise to me. And then finally, I got audiology. They didn't have the power hearing aids then when I first started in the 80s, but they got them during that decade. And then that helped me a lot. And I stayed on top of all the developments and during that time. But it was a long time that I really could not hear at all, that I couldn't hear music and all that. Maybe 30 years of that before they evaluated me and said, "Oh, you're eligible for a cochlear implant." And I said, "Oh, I'm not that bad." So I held out for another year or two, but then I went to the otologist, and he had stepped behind me and while he was doing a procedure, looking down my nasal passages and stuff. And he said, when he finished, he said, when I was doing that procedure, I gave you some instructions. Oh, you did? I didn't hear them at all. So he said, I think it's time for a cochlear implant. So I agreed. I had my first one in 2013, and the next year I had the other one done, and I've never regretted this. So,
Well,
the four of us here, have you ever had a specific memory of the events around your cochlear implants that were kind of peculiar or interesting?
Bob, just before we pursue that question, I just want to remind people to please raise your hand so that we can, if you'd like to ask a question of any of us, and when you do, please remember to unmute yourself. So, Bob, I think you're addressing this question to the other three of us, correct?
Yeah.
And again, we're hoping the other members here will be able to join us. We've got 27 people on the call, so we hope we can do it. Who'd like to take that one?
Well,
Bob, why don't you repeat the question again?
Well,
I'll dive in.
yeah. I think we've already mentioned oral rehabilitation, which is reading not the book you're reading and then having the audio that you compare it to, which is a great way to train your brain to recognize and adapt to what the new situation is.
Yeah. No, I think it was already mentioned that we have followed that procedure, and that's part of the therapy. You go through this, and there is some therapy involved, and it can take anywhere from months, probably 1 or 2 months to maybe 6 or 12 months before your hearing really is up to speed. Yeah. And each individual's experience is different. I think in my case, it was not as instant as Jim and Larry described. It was very Donald Ducky, very computerese, but gradually working with what I used as Kindle audiobooks Then they have an extra feature called, I think they call it Whisper Sync. And basically you can read the Kindle, read the book on your Kindle and at the exact same time listen to the audio. And of course, the audio is keyed so that when you turn a page in your Kindle, the audio follows along. So I did quite a bit of that. It was very effective, but it's still, you still have to expect, I think, some sort of therapy for some period of time afterwards. And I think the more you do it, the better the result's going to be.
Yes. And so I discovered that the advanced bionics people had made kind of a computer game like that. So where the instructor would say 3 words. They were somewhat similar. And you would say which one it was, and then you'd find out if you got it right or not. And it was very addictive. And I got pretty good at that. And it took me about 6 weeks before I really could hear without having to go do that. And then the other thing I discovered after I had got through that part is that I could turn on classical music and hear it wonderfully, even identify different instruments playing. So that was a great, great relief to me.
Any other comments on that topic? Jim, Larry?
Unmute
Larry, you're
yourself,
muted.
Larry.
Yeah.
I would comment when it comes to training that I think a number of people, I know Eliot and I both had the experience, I'm not sure about Jim, but that I've always really enjoyed listening to music and going to concerts and so forth. And after I got the cochlear implant, music didn't sound good anymore. It sounded horrible. And that was a real disappointment. But with time, I found I could enjoy simple music, like one soloist with a guitar, something like that, that I could enjoy that. But anything with close harmony, with a chorus or with even a quartet was very unpleasant, really. But with time, that's gotten better for me. And I think if I had focused on it the way I had focused on reading books and listening to the audio and practicing training on speech, if I'd taken the same diligence in listening to music, I think I would have adapted much more quickly and enjoyed music. The secret there is to listen to music that you enjoyed and knew well before you lost your hearing. And then if you listen to it over and over, eventually your mind adapts to remember how that's supposed to sound. And that's the way it starts to sound. So, but that is a great issue for a lot of people is music. But, when you first get your cochlear implant, it may be a bit of a shock, but don't give up. Stick to it.
Well, I would throw in my 2 cents here. I've always enjoyed music, but I know absolutely nothing about music. So I found when I started listening to music over the cochlear implant, it certainly sounded different, but I was still able to enjoy it. And one of the things that I have found about music is oftentimes I would listen on my phone and have it going directly into my cochlear implant. And other times I would listen to it through the microphone on the cochlear implant. And I found that through the microphone always has been better for me. When I have it go directly, it seems to me that it's less alive. It's almost more mechanical. And when I listen to it through the microphone, it almost sounds like the good old days when I enjoyed music, even though I know nothing about it.
Just, I mean, we're in the subject of music. Well, no, before I go there, I see we have a hand up. Jane, would you like to chime in? Please unmute yourself.
Are you talking to me?
Yes, you had your hand up.
Yeah, I'm have an acoustic neuroma in my, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, I have an acoustic neuroma in my right ear. I've been deaf in my right ear for 50 years, gradually lost my hearing in my good ear, but now so for all of my adult life, I've only could only hear out of one ear. And now I have a perforated eardrum in that ear. And I'm profoundly, without my hearing aid, I'm profoundly deaf, really like 100% in both ears. So I was evaluated at Stanford for a cochlear implant, and they're encouraging me to do it. But I have multiple diseases between both ears. And so the one thing I'm concerned about mostly is it not working, and I'm profoundly deaf. The other thing is vertigo, that because I have an acoustic neuroma, I've been fortunate that I don't have vertigo with it. I don't have a paralysis with it. It didn't grow. It's still sitting there for 50 years, thank you God. So I didn't have surgery in that ear. But my question is about the vertigo piece of it. That is my, I guess, what I'm concerned about mostly, because I do also get positional vertigo. And I'm always nauseated somewhat. So I think I'm dizzy all the time and don't know it. So my question, if you've answered a lot of the questions about music, I listen. Now I can still hear everybody with my hearing aid. And I can hear music with my hearing aid, and I can hear the tone of people's voices with my hearing aid. But I'm 100% need to rely on my hearing aid. Without it, I'm profoundly deaf. So if you'd like to comment on any of that.
So your question is whether we had any side effects of vertigo as a result of the procedure. I mean, that's a good. I had Meniere's. I had dozens of completely debilitating vertigo attacks over the years, but fortunately, none as a result of my cochlear implant surgery, nor have I had any since. So, like Meniere's, it tends to come and go, and I don't know. Did Jim or Larry, did
Are
you
you saying you get
have any experience of vertigo after the procedure?
I did, not immediately after, but about a week after the procedure, I stuck a mouth guard in that I used to keep from grinding my teeth. And I felt a little dizzy the next morning, but when I stuck it in the next night, I experienced severe vertigo. And it took me several days to get over that. But I haven't had any problems since.
Did you ever get an explanation of what the connection was between the mouth guard and the vertigo?
No, and in fact, the doctor said that he thought that even if I needed some treatment later for TMJ, he didn't think that it would recur. That's his judgment. So, but I haven't had any issues since.
Yeah. Larry, did you have any problem with that?
Not well. I long ago had another condition, and I've forgotten the name of it, but it's where the crystals in your ear get misplaced, and You get vertigo if you look up quickly, and I've had that most of my adult life, and I still have it a little bit. The brain adjusts to it, but the vertigo I have, I couldn't attribute to the cochlear implant because I had it before. So I don't think I had any effect on balance or vertigo from the implant itself.
Did it make
Yeah.
it?
Eliot, so that's called benign positional paroxysmal vertigo, is when you have the crystals you had, Larry. And usually that does respond to head exercises, can be very beneficial for that. But regarding your question, Judy, the acoustic neuroma is more on the vestibular nerve, where this is really working more with the cochlear nerve. So I don't see how the cochlear implant's going to worsen the vertigo that you've had. I don't think it's going to cause a worsening.
Okay.
This is two separate nerves, and they're really.
I guess my concern is I only hear out of one ear. So all of you have two ears, right? Can you hear me?
Yeah.
So I only hear out of one ear. So I think a cochlear implant is more risky. I don't-
But if you only hear out of one ear and you have, so I mean, one ear is not functional, you can get the cochlear implant in your non-functional ear without taking much of a risk. Does that make sense?
Yeah, they can't put it in that because that's the nerve. It's on the nerve.
Oh, okay.
Trauma.
Okay. So
Let me
they
put
cannot
it
do
in
that.
my good ear.
Yeah. Yeah. I see. I can only say, and Ken's much more qualified to talk about this, but I know the procedures generally have improved over the years in terms of allowing you to retain some natural hearing. Someone having the implant today is going to have a lot more natural hearing retained than I had 10, 12 years ago. And so that is a factor that the technology seems to improve every year in that respect. But yeah, these are important questions. Jane Wilson, you've had your hand up for some time now. Would you like to jump in with a question?
Yes, I had surgery in September and I've had the processor for about 3 weeks. I find that it's heavy on my ear. I wondered if anyone else experienced that. It's sometimes I can wear it for several hours and other times it just bothers me. I just take it off.
So is that, I think it probably just a matter of getting used to it, I would think. And it depends on whether you use one with small batteries or whether you use one that's rechargeable. Like my batteries are about an inch long and they weigh a bit. So that, I've got a pretty good package, but I don't know. I just think it's the kind of thing you'll eventually get used to.
I've tried both the small battery and the longer battery, if it made any difference. And I can't tell any difference, but I just wondered if people have some kind of, I don't know, a pad,
Yeah.
something you can put behind it so it doesn't hurt your head, or if that's something that I'll just get used to.
Yeah. Well, I know I had behind the hearing aids for about at least 10 years before I got my implant. So, there wasn't that much difference between a behind the ear hearing aid and a cochlear implant.
But I feel like the behind the ear hearing aids were so tiny and so lightweight. I didn't feel anything. This is a lot heavier.
Yeah, I don't know if anyone else had an issue with that. Yeah.
I haven't really noticed any heavy weight from mine.
Yeah, I haven't had that problem, but I wore hearing aids and, when I first got them 25 years ago, they were heavier and they certainly got lighter with time. But switching to the cochlear implant, I didn't notice much difference. Now, there are two kinds that I have. One is the kind that goes over the ear. The other is the kind that just is totally self-contained. And that doesn't go over my ear. It just sits on the head. And that doesn't, I hardly notice it. I've just gotten used to it, which is dangerous because it's easy to go in the shower with the hearing devices on.
Yeah, I do have the self-contained one, but I see the audiologist next week, but there's no sound coming out of it.
Oh,
That's why I'm using the bigger one.
Oh, I see.
It's another issue, yeah.
Larry, is there
Well, the-
any difference between those two? What, you notice any difference in sound quality between those two different types of setups?
Larry?
Not really. There may be a little bit difference because the new device I got is the latest version, and it has a lot of extra so-called artificial intelligence built in, and who knows what that's doing. But
Right.
Well, to that question, I do notice a slight difference between the cochlear implant that hangs over my ear and using the Rondo or the piece that goes on my back of my head. But mostly it's because of the location of the microphone. The microphone over the ear faces forward, and the one on my head faces either to the side or slightly backward. And so I do notice a difference due to that. But the quality of the sound, once I get it tuned in, isn't any different.
Yeah, I could say the same. I have the same called Rondos, but my Rondos are 10 or 12 years old. I haven't upgraded them. Because one thing, when you get implants, every 5 years, you're eligible for an upgrade to the latest technology. But they won't upgrade everything. They'll only upgrade, one processor per ear. So I wear my behind the ear processors because they have a lot more, as Larry said, more AI built into it. But in my situation, it also allows for streaming, where I can stream directly from many of my devices. Instead of listening to the speaker on my laptop, it streams the audio directly into my devices. And I find that highly effective. So that's the difference in my case.
so, Eliot, you suppose you should clarify that you're talking about Medicare will pay to upgrade your device every 5 years.
Correct. Yeah, that's that.
I want to bring up, there are two questions. I guess some people cannot put the raised hand feature. One is from Janet Corsetti and another is from Tracy Burns. So they are not raising their hand, but maybe we can answer. Oh, Janet doesn't need anything?
She's muted.
Janet, you're muted.
Okay, there we go. I was concerned about, do you have to replace them? You know, the little wire that he was talking about, does it ever short out? I mean, is there any, how long, I mean, do you ever have to have them replaced? That's my,
That
So-
actually was a problem early in the development.
So,
There was one case of a girl aged 12 who got implants, and she was being shocked by them. And she didn't know what it was, and her parents couldn't understand it. But there was quite a lawsuit, as you might imagine. But the reliability in the production of these devices is greatly improved.
thank you.
I guess I should mention too, if when I showed this to you, you saw the wire from it, that's not a wire, that's a leash. And that's in case it comes off, it doesn't fall to the ground and break. It just hangs down and I can put it back on. But that's a leash that everybody uses when they use this device. But some people use them for the over-the-ear devices too, especially kids where they're much more active, and their devices do come off their ears.
Just a point on that. I began using the Rondo without the leash until I knocked it off 3 times. Happily, it didn't malfunction, but
Yeah.
I figured I better put the leash on after that.
Jim, I always wear mine with a baseball cap, and that holds them in place. So I wear them every day when I work out or walk or go to the gym, but I'm always wearing a baseball cap, and that holds them in place.
Yeah.
I do a lot of Pilates. I have for about 30 years. And I had the audiologist make some molds for me so that I could hold, it holds the processor on. And I found that very reliable.
We have another question in chat from Tracy Burns. Tracy, you're muted. Would you like to ask your question?
I was just curious of the brands that, as Jane was talking about, the heaviness is one of my concerns as well, especially because I'll probably end up with 2 and getting headaches and such. If the different brands or different types in each brand makes a difference on the heaviness. So what was her brand and what were the panelist brands? I was curious about.
Well, I have Cochlear.
I have Med.
Yeah, I have Med-L also. Bob, what do you have?
Bob said he had Cochlear.
He had Cochlear also. Yeah.
Yeah, and
Yeah,
I have
what do you have?
Med-L. But I think you touched a bit against a very important point. When I'm an electrical engineer, I know lots about audio, about devices, electronics, and I was so confused when I started looking at these competing brands. And first of all, they use special names like this is a Rondo, and the one over the ear is a Sonnet. And they don't explain this, that they just talk about these devices, and each manufacturer uses different names for these devices. So that's one thing that's confusing. And then they ask you make choices, not only among manufacturers, but among the devices. And it's really worth talking to the audiologist, especially. The doctors will have some preference of which brand to install under your skin based on your personal physiology and your personal hearing loss and so forth. So you definitely want to go with what your doctor says, but the audiologist is the one who fits these devices on the outside and who knows their characteristics and the advantages and disadvantages. Sometimes I regret a little bit having selected Med-L. And the reason is once that's implanted under your skin, you're stuck with that manufacturer. You can't just say, well, I'm going to switch to Cochlear America because I want to try their new features. And, that means more surgery and you just can't do that. And the Med-L, I think, is kind of a laggard in new technologies, in the latest stuff. I think Cochlear, from as far as I can tell, is leader of the pack on that. Now, maybe others will disagree with me, but there are new things coming out now, like for hearing aids, and called Auracast is a new kind of Blu-ray technology that broadcasts to people. So one person speaking in a mic can be heard by everyone with Auracast in their cochlear implants or in their hearing aids. And I think Cochlear already has Auracast offered in their new processors. Med-L will not give any kind of answer about whether I'm sure they'll have it, but it's a time away. Do you know, Bob?
Actually, Larry, I understand that my processor could be adapted to accept it.
Okay. So if that's important to you to have the technology, then you might want to talk to the audiologist about what's best for you. And the audiologists usually fit all three and even more. There are some minor or less market share companies that make cochlear implants, so they'll give you good advice. Some of them will be a little, they don't want to be blamed at some later time for having recommended something that you're not happy with. So they'll be a little reticent to give you strong advice, but listen to what they're saying between the lines, and they'll give you, and frankly, the audiologist I had mentioned before.
What you're listening to.
Yeah, before I even knew the brand, that Med-El seemed to be lagging technology-wise compared to the other two majors.
Larry, I'd amplify that a little bit. I don't disagree with what you're saying because I think Med-El has lagged in terms of connectivity. But according to my doc at Stanford, they spend more of their effort and time and energy in the internal processors in terms of developing the internal piece and the electrodes. And particularly, they were, I think, they were the first of the three to have an internal implant that was compatible with having an MRI. And I think they have all since followed suit on that. But at the time, I may have had to make that choice. I was concerned that with other manufacturers, if you had to have an MRI, they would have to surgically remove the internal piece in order to have an MRI, which was not very attractive. But I think the manufacturers tend to leapfrog one another. One will be ahead in this, and then a year later, this one will be ahead. But like Larry, I've been a little frustrated with Med-El has been a little bit slow, and it wasn't until I got my third upgrade, a few months ago, not too many months ago, where I had the capability to stream directly from various devices into my plants. And that's particularly important when you're watching television or, in my case, listening to music. I find music, and I don't know if this contradicts what Jim said, but I find music much more enjoyable when it's streamed directly from the source rather than listening to it via my speakers and microphones.
I'd like to clarify one thing, that even now, if you have to have the highest powered MRI, they need to remove the battery from what's underneath or not the battery, the magnet from what's underneath your skin. That's a very minor thing to do. They remove it before the surgery. After the surgery, they put it back in, very small incision. So they're not removing the whole device. They're just removing the magnet.
Yeah. Well, I understand they can have like up to 1.5 Teslas or something for.
I'm listening to this
an MRI.
lecture on cochlear implants.
Really? It's a long bloody talk.
Yeah, it's different people.
I don't know what that was about.
Listen
Kate,
to half an hour at least.
Kate, you have your hand up. You're muted, Kate. You are muted.
I think it's Rosemond.
Hand up.
No, it's not.
Now you can't see me. There. Everything in place? Okay. I have two things. One is a comment that I got from someone in our club who's not apparently here today. And he said, in case the option is not covered by panelists, before anyone plans to have cochlear implant surgery, I recommend that they apply for SSIDI, Social Security Disability Benefits. For the first year after an initial cochlear implant surgery, the treatment is considered a qualifying disability. When I had my first cochlear implant surgery, neither my audiologist, otolaryngologist, or anyone bothered to tell me about the corresponding SSDI benefits, which I really wish I had known about before going into surgery. So that's helpful for someone who's working. So my question, and that comes from Carrie Tucker, and my question, without commenting on what he said, is what happens in that time frame between surgery and getting turned on? I am at a point, I don't hear without my hearing aids at all, and I don't like going anywhere because I feel like I'm in a cocoon. I can't address anything, any sounds, directions, cars coming. I don't feel that I ought to be driving when I hear absolutely nothing. So I'm wondering, what is life like in between the feeling better after the surgery and the 1 month wait? Can you put a hearing aid in?
Yes,
Yes.
You can?
yes.
Great.
In the ear that it doesn't have the cochlear implant.
Yeah, I mean, that's the point. You're not going to hear anything or very little with the ear that has the implant, but presumably you do them one at a time. But I suppose you could imagine a situation where if if you have no hearing at all, I think that's generally, if you have bilateral hearing loss, they're going to start out with the ear that has the worst hearing. And so that during that 2-week period, while you're waiting for the surgery to heal, you're going to have some hearing in your other ear. And I think that's probably the way most people do it.
What if you don't hear in the other ear?
You got a problem.
Well,
Yeah.
Jim, maybe you can explain. Did you go? I did them one at a time, so I didn't have that experience.
Yeah, I did one at a time too. And I'm trying to work on the second one.
But the point is, when you have the second one, you have your successful cochlear implant on
That's
the other
right.
side. So it's
Yeah.
not a problem. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And when I had my first one, I had the hearing aid in the other ear, and that wasn't a problem for the 2-week period that I didn't have the cochlear implemented.
Does that answer your question, Kate? Yeah. Okay. Let's see. Anybody else? Kathleen, you had your hand up a little bit. but,
Tracy is here.
Tracy.
She's waiting for you.
Okay, who's next here? Let's see.
Tracy.
Tracy.
Oh,
Okay, Tracy, you're up.
okay. Hi. Yeah, about I have a bazillion questions. So I've been reading about whether or not to do simultaneous surgery or do the sequential. And now what it sounds like, that was my question earlier too. What's the interim between getting turned on and having the surgery? And it sounds like you don't hear nothing. So that my situation is I have Meniere's in my left ear, which I've had for a long time. I've had severe hearing loss in that ear forever. And then I got sudden hearing loss on August 30th, and my right gone. Some of it has come back, but it's not looking super good for a ton of it coming back. So it makes sense then to do, one of the things about doing it at the same time I heard was that you can get some better, that both sides kind of go at the same time instead of getting one side and then depending on how many months or years between getting the second one, that it can kind of be wonky. What is people's opinion on sequential or simultaneous, getting them both done?
Yeah. Good question. I sort of use the analogy of having cataract surgery. They always do cataract surgery one at a time. I think, in case something goes south. But in your case, my situation was very similar to yours in that through Meniere's, I lost all my hearing in my left ear. I had zero. So it was a no-brainer to get that done. But beyond that, did anybody else have any comments on that question of whether to do them all at once or both at once? I've never heard of that being done, frankly.
I haven't either.
My audiologist said that my doctor would not do two at a time. He'd only do one at a time.
Yeah, I think that's probably most common. Yeah. So you start out with your worst ear. So, whatever you have in the other ear, you're going to have that for generally 2 weeks. I think it's, is that Larry and Jim, is that your experience at 2 weeks before they turn it on?
Yeah.
2 weeks.
Yeah.
And I would say we haven't talked much about assisted listening devices and, the little microphones and stuff that can really help. But one thing that I find very useful is the captioning capabilities of my phone. There are some apps that you can download. Otter is one, OTTER. Another is Ada. Is that right? ADA or yeah. And these are really excellent. So if you're wanting to talk to someone and you can't hear, you can just use it and it'll print out what the person's saying in text on your phone. The other interesting thing about it, even if they're speaking German and you speak English, it'll still print out what they're saying in English with some of these programs. So as an interim measure between when you get your surgery and before they turn on the processor, that would be a fallback position to use the captioning on your smartphone.
Yeah. No, we could have a whole separate discussion on assisted listening devices. In fact, I'll make a pitch later for Saturday Connections. But at this point, any more questions about anything we've discussed so far? We maybe have time for. I'd like to move on to sort of business section of our meeting today in about 8 minutes. So. Anybody else have any? We haven't been following the chat. I don't know, Janie, if you've been following the chat for possible questions.
I think, okay. You mentioned some links, Eliot, that you wanted to share. I think it was Envoy in there.
Rich has his hand up.
Oh, okay. Tracy has her hand back up.
While we're waiting for more questions, I'll just say another word or two about music. I think all of us who have had cochlear implants have had various experience with music, but generally we will not enjoy music as much after an implant as you did before. It's still possible, but it does sound different just because of the frequency response of the cochlear implant is much narrower, generally between 300 and 3,000 hertz, whereas music may go from 20 to 20,000 hertz. So you're not going to enjoy music as much, but there's something I will put in the chat is the University of Southern California has a program called the Bionic Ear Lab. And they meet every Thursday from 12:30 to 1:30, and they focus on music appreciation. And many of the people that participate in this are professional musicians who have lost their hearing. And everybody in the program, they're generally 50, 60, 70 people, and they all have cochlear implants, and they're all focused on hearing. And so one session they'll have a harpsichord player. In the next session, they'll have a saxophone player. Another section will have someone playing the cello, and they can demonstrate, they play different parts of music. And it's a really interesting program that's absolutely free, and it's conducted every week by USC. So if you're interested, and I think I see Neil. Neil, you're the one that got me into this program, and I don't make every one of them, but I do enjoy it when they are so there are strategies for increasing music appreciation. And so anybody else have any comments on music?
Eliot, I accidentally lowered Tracy's hand, and then we've got Mary after her. So don't end until we take care of those two.
Okay, I didn't see any other hands, Jenny. So yeah, please go ahead.
Hi again. Hello. A couple quick questions, which is, how does the cochlear implant affect tinnitus? Do you still have ringing? Does it kind of lessen it? Does it affect it at all? And then my other question is kind of to the music, like now nothing makes sense. There is no, it's all a mess. But there's some frequencies I hear, some I don't. And then of course there's some that are distorted. Does the cochlear implant fill in more than what I have now, which is so minimal? Does it bring, or do you still have some frequencies that are just kind of gone? If that makes sense. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm not sure I'm qualified to give an answer. I don't know if Ken would want to weigh in on that, but I do know just as I said, generally the frequency response in a cochlear implant is not as good as hearing aids, or of course, natural hearing.
Huh.
I don't, again, Ken, do you have any thoughts on that?
Not going to get the same frequency range with a cochlear implant, but I do think that, you know, as everyone's been saying, I think the quality can improve over time with more brain activity. So I think that, you know, with more rehab, I think that could improve. I don't know if you're going to be getting, my sense would be that you would be getting some of those missed, you know, frequencies where the cochlear implant will not give as high of frequencies, let's say, as you might get with hearing aids. And that's one of the problems with music, where you can usually pick up percussion a lot better with cochlear implants because it's fairly good at the lower frequencies. So I do think that over time that can improve.
How about the tinnitus question?
Tinnitus, I don't know. It's a very good question.
I
haven't had serious issues with tinnitus either before or after, Tracy, so I can't answer. Anybody else on the tinnitus question?
Yes, I have it. And when I'm wearing my processors, I don't even notice it because the processors suppress that tinnitus. But if I take them off, I'm deaf, but I can hear the buzzing. But it's not bad. It's not anything I've been bothered by.
Hey, I see Mary's hand up and Neil's hand up. We'll start with you, Mary.
Okay. How you were talking about pitch. So I've sung in choirs for the last 40 years. Will I know that I'm not singing on pitch with the people next to me? Will I know their pitch? I have Meniere's in the right ear, and so it hasn't worked. I've worn hearing aids for almost 60 years. I was born with some problems. But what about pitch? Can I sing along and be the one that they look at because she's off? In which case I'll quit the choir. Do you know anything about it? What I heard today that delighted me is that you can use books and books on tape and reading as a practice to get better. Is there any practice for singers to get better with pitch that you know of?
You know, Larry, go ahead.
Well, one of the things that there was an audiologist at Pacific Hearing who's since retired, but she was an opera singer, and she had a wonderful talk about music appreciation. And one of the things she always said was, you need to see this person who is singing. And then you will do better if you can do that and listen. So you need to probably think of all your senses and using them all.
Yeah, I'd add another aspect to this, and that is even with hearing aids, if you have very profound or very serious hearing loss, you lose the ability to determine what direction a sound is coming from. You can't tell whether it's the person singing next to you or in front of you or behind you. And that really interferes with your singing along with the group, because you're hearing everybody around you. And usually that comes in louder than you can hear yourself if you're in a large group. So one of the things that would really help is to have monitors, like that you use your cochlear implant as a monitor to stream your own voice to your hearing. So you'd be able to hear yourself at the same time you're hearing the other people. And I think if you practice that, and if you had a keyboard or something and you could practice matching the tones, that you could get back the ability to sing by yourself or with a group. But as Ken was sort of touching upon, your natural hearing, your cochlea, has 10,000 little hairs that connect to nerves, that all of these are using processing to determine the sound of the noise, the pitches and the mix and so forth. My cochlear implant has 24 wires going in, and therefore it can't have more than, and some of those are feeding the same sensor. They're feeding pairs of sensors at the same place in the cochlea. So the resolution that you have in determining pitch is going to be much less than you have with natural hearing, and even less than you have with hearing aids. So it's a challenge, but as Bob points out, there are great musicians who are deaf and have cochlear implants, and they're able to, by practice and by training and working on it, can gain back their natural abilities. There's one woman that attends these meetings regularly who is a violin and a cello player, I think, and she always has in the background all of these instruments that she plays.
Yeah.
And she does quite well, I think. But it's, it takes work to get it back where you were before.
Time for one more question. And
thank you.
Thank you, Mary. Neil, you've had your hand up. This will be the last question, and we've got a few announcements to close us out here.
Okay, this is very short. I posted a link to the music group that you were talking about, Eliot.
Oh, good. Thank you.
A link to a National Health Institute article that says that cochlear implants usually show marked improvement in tinnitus. I have posted a link to Mandy Harvey, who is the woman that I think you were referring to before, who's an inspiration to me because I'm taking voice lessons again. And for the last 2 weeks, with a couple of exceptions, I sang through 2 different songs on pitch. So I have, I'm not ready to go out and do karaoke yet, but I have been working on this for I have my CIs for 4 and 5 years, but for the last 3, I've begun going from music sounding not very good to today. So anyway, and thanks for doing this. always glad to visit with your group.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Neil. And yeah, I might remind everyone to copy the chat before you sign off, because there are a lot of useful links in there that a number of us have put up. Yeah,
Eliot,
I think like to wrap this up. Jim, did you have a comment?
I just noticed that Rich Henke has had his hand up on the screen for quite a while, and I wondered if he has a question.
Yes, I do have a question. I'm planning to get a cochlear implant in my poorer ear the first part of the year, and to use it in conjunction with my hearing aid and my better ear. And I'm most concerned about getting a company that will have a really good interface for that. And I was told that Cochlear America has a seamless interface between the hearing aid and the cochlear implant. But when I read about it and research it, I can't understand what they're talking about. And I haven't been able to get any real information on, is there a difference between the companies if you're using it with a hearing aid and the cochlear implant?
Yeah, that's did somebody, I know Cochlear, again, it's back to Larry's comment. I think Cochlear has a better integration with what type of hearing aid, Larry? I'm blanking out on that, but
Phonak, I think. I think it was Phonak.
A Phonak, yeah, Phonak. And I think they have technology that ties in with the Roger Penn and other assisted listening devices. So yeah, Rich, that's an important point, is to determine compatibility with your present hearing aid manufacturer. And
Even need to be my present one. I'll get whatever hearing aid works, but I want something that will work together with the cochlear implant, and that's easy to use and doesn't require you to open 6 apps and press 5 buttons every time you go someplace.
no, and that's an important point. I think your surgeon ought to be able to answer those questions. And generally these guys try to keep a level playing field. And I'm talking about the surgeons that do the implants. They are very conscientious about not trying to favor one over the other. They'll hand you 3 sets of literature and they'll tell you to go figure it out. For better or for worse, that's the way they operate. But listen, I want to wrap it up here. I want to really thank our panelists, Larry, Jim, Bob, for your contribution. I want to thank everybody else who joined here for the great questions. I think we had some very, very productive discussions.